I've been doing this for the past 6 months. This is my job. This is my life.
We're from the EFF. We have our manifestos with us. Do you have like 2 minutes of your time?
No, I'm sorry.
We rely on the people on the streets. We rely on the people in the corners.
For the schools, EFF. For the country,
Politics is a bridge between ignorance and consciousness.
I'm saying you can go in.
This opportunity to thank the South African voters for having engaged in peaceful elections on the 3rd of August, ushering in a new era. I particularly thank those who voted for the EFF because the EFF is the only party that moved from 0 to 8%. Because in 2011, the EFF
Thank you so much for accepting the invite today and joining me. I know that you have your own podcast called the Mpendulo Busane Show, and I've had a listen to a few of your episodes, and I think you are one person with a very unique way of thinking about things. And so I'm really happy to have this conversation with you today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Star. Thank you for actually stalking me and then getting my number.
I always make a way, so Jay, I have my ways. But today's conversation is gonna be one that I was very scared to have because this is a topic that's very controversial. But I think as young people, it's important for us to engage in the topic that we're gonna talk about today. And we're gonna talk today about the politics of our time, specifically within the context of South Africa. I think politics in our country has evolved in tremendous ways from, the advent of democracy to 2020, and we've seen so many shifts in presidencies, and those events have brought many changes to the economy, to the political economy and society as a whole. So I think it's good to discuss these changes and where we think these changes will take us, and hopefully, provide our own solutions to how we could contribute to the political conversation in our country. So I think, the best way to start off this conversation is obviously to look back at where we started, because history always gives us a reference to the future. So looking at, 1994 and that whole victory of political freedom and other racial groups getting the opportunity to participate in the activities of the country, and looking at how the political space and the effect of it on people's lives has evolved tremendously right through to 2020. How do you think the modern day landscape of South Africa now is different as compared to the landscape that it was at in 1994 and even during apartheid? And how have, I guess, the needs of South Africans shifted with that evolution?
I think when going back to 1994 and going back before that, let's look at the TRC, all right? So yeah. When I look back at the TRC, I always think to myself, why did we actually have a TRC? And I don't want to sound dark or anything, but if you look at Germany's history, when they had the jailing of the German Nazis who did harm to Jews, you see why they did it. Hence why today Germany doesn't have any discrimination against creed, race, or color, Yeah. So when I look back at the TRC, I think to myself, South Africa didn't really go through a transition. They went through more of a shift. We went through more of a shift. So it was a thing of like, this thing sort of like happened overnight, if that makes sense. So it was sort of like, okay, yesterday we hated each other, tomorrow we all love each other.
Love each other.
Nation.
Yeah.
And the term of the Rainbow Nation is very fragile, anyone who speaks sense and gets through to the masses can actually break down that thing, the Rainbow Nation. So if you look at Julius Malema, he's shaking it a bit. He's shaking it a lot. Actually.
Not even a bit, a lot.
So I think, a lot. So he's shaking it because he speaks truth and he speaks some sense, especially to us Black people, because we can relate. Even though we didn't live through the times, but we can relate of the systematic racism that's happening now. Racism is not a thing of me discriminating another person of a different race or another person of a different race discriminating against me blatantly. It can be systematic nowadays, see in corporates and different gatherings, you know. But yeah, personally, I think it's the TRC. The TRC really, we needed really to look back at that, you know.
Yeah.
And think to ourselves, I'm not saying that we should have like did what they did to us. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying we could have went a different route.
And it's funny that you mentioned the TRC, because I know in a lot of videos and interviews I watch of international speakers who speak about the political economy of South Africa, they always mention how they idolize South Africa as like I guess a monument of democracy because of the TRC, and how I've even heard African Americans say it's something that they needed in America. And I often wonder, you know, maybe they lack the context and knowledge to know how on a day-to-day basis we don't feel any, you know, benefits of the TRC, because it just felt like a, you know, scraping the surface of something that was way bigger, you know. And so I definitely agree with you on that point. And I think, you know, growing from that and looking at what the ANC has tried to do to effect the real change, which is economic change in this country. A plan that has been put in action is the National Development Plan that aims to achieve economic prosperity for all South Africans by 2030. And it's a plan that really places emphasis on, you know, small to medium enterprises, entrepreneurship, trade, and industrial policy. But, you know, what are your thoughts on that? And how do you think a plan like that, firstly, is one that has been implemented properly? And will it be one that will really achieve, you know, economic prosperity for a lot of Black people in poverty?
Yeah. Before I touch on the NDP, I just want to say a lot of people say that a lot of political analysts, let me not say a lot of people, a lot of political analysts really think that the TRC, or our transition, as we would call it, or transition or shift, was really what's it called? An exchange of political power for economical power. That's what a lot of people said about CODESA as well. That we got political power in exchange for economic power. So we gave the Black people, us Black people, we gave white people the economy, and we took the political side. And now, obviously, they've got us in a checkmate, because anything that makes the money will go around is money, you know? Exactly. So we can't, political power is useless if you have no money. Do you understand? So hence why we hear a lot of political parties, whether it be the EFF or the ANC or the DA, they all have different donors, you know? So it becomes controversial when certain individuals donate to certain parties. And that's where I think the problem is with the CODESA and the TRC. So the way we handled stuff back then, it wasn't well thought through, but I understand why, because it was time as well, because it was a thing of like, we want to be free now. You know, we want to be free now. So I think we couldn't have prolonged it. Imagine us being born, or me being born, speaking for myself, me being born in an apartheid system, you know. I don't think I would have liked that. I think I would have rebelled. Just to touch on the NDP. So the National Development Plan was a document drafted in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, in 2012. And that document stipulates that we must get the majority out of poverty, and we must what's it called, narrow the inequality gap in South Africa. I think because of what we've had in the past few years, I'm looking back in 2012. We've had two presidents, okay? And the economy, some people will say that Zuma doesn't do much for the economy. Some people are saying Ramaphosa is doing really well for the economy right now, because if you look, the rand to the dollar today is like 14 rand flat, which is great news. We haven't been there since a very long time. So when it comes to the National Development Plan, I think SMMEs are key drivers in that. I think also SOEs are key drivers in the National Development Plan, because the moment we don't industrialize our SOEs, that's when things fall apart. Because if we can't get money in other than the revenue service, how do we build an economy, and how do we expect foreign investors to invest in us if we don't even do the work on ourselves? You know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Imagine you're not doing the work, but you're looking for a sponsor from a big company like Deloitte or KPMG, but you're not putting in the work. You know, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So for NDP, I think, look, the document was drafted in 2010, right? It's 8 years now after that. It's 2020. We've got 10 more years to go. Within that 8 years, right, the government can argue and say, yeah, we've got infrastructure, right? Well, we're getting in infrastructure, right? National minimum wage, they got it right. Okay, cool. Load shedding, they're getting it right, they're not getting it right. We're still in debt. Fact of the matter. And with the oceans economy operation Pakisa, I think that is also slowly coming into play. But with that, we need to industrialize our SOEs and also attract foreign investment for those things to lift off.
No, you definitely have a point there. I mean, I remember writing an article about the NDP itself, and what I've noticed.
Oh yeah, I read it. Funny enough, I read it.
Yeah. When I wrote that article, I was reminded of a event I went to, Kakokowam in Pongola one summer, and there was an event that was curated by CEDA for the local entrepreneurs there, and they came in, and their topic for discussion was exports and how to get your business ready for exports. And firstly, I was really marveled at the audience that was there, because it was largely old people who are probably going to die soon, so the young people weren't there. And secondly, it was just your everyday, entrepreneur who's trying to feed their family, and on their minds, they're not thinking about exports and trade policy, so that's when I realized
people live hand to mouth.
Exactly. And that's when I realized that the NDP is a beautiful plan, but I think if we're not capacitating, young people and old people who are entrepreneurs to know how to scale up their businesses, then I think we're really setting ourselves up for failure, and that's why for me, when I look at the NDP, I think it's a really good plan, but we're not focusing on the fundamentals like education and skilling people enough to get to the level where they can consider exporting, their goods. And it leads me to my next question of, over the years, I personally feel like the NC has done all they could, I guess. You can't reverse 200 plus years of colonization and apartheid and all these things that are set up against black people in like 25 years. So I'm not going to criticize them harshly, but I do think that our progress has been slow, and it could have been mitigated in certain ways. But do you think that the entrance of organizations like the EFF into the political space has really made the ANC more radical in them addressing things that are, pressing needs for people? Do you think that without the EFF, we wouldn't have had discussions about land reform and service delivery and all these things at the robust level that we should be having them at?
I think politics are politics, one party making an argument in parliament for the greater good, I think it's a good thing, I think it's fair to say that you're right, that the EFF did raise the point about pay back the money. They did raise the point about expropriation of land. I don't think the ANC would have dealt with it if it wasn't for those parties. And you need to understand that, like most parties in what's it called, in South Africa, most of them are a break away from the ANC.
Yeah.
So the question that I ask myself is that, were these ideologies long time within the ANC but just not seen through? Because we know that within the ANC, the most radical structure within the ANC is the youth league, So looking at Malema and how he was in the youth league, you would understand why he's raising up such issues within the EFF now, him being CIC. So yes and no. We needed a party like the EFF to come into play, but I think if the ANC took into consideration the youth league, we wouldn't have seen the economic freedom fighters. I think, in my view.
Very interesting, very unique points of view that I actually haven't heard in discussions like this. But I think it's definitely something to note. And I guess looking at strives within the ANC itself, because I mean, over history, they've had their own fair share of internal conflicts, from the Mbeki to the Zuma presidency, and the Zuma to the Cyril Ramaphosa New Dawn presidency. And I remember when, Cyril Ramaphosa gave his first SONA, and he gave us the task to be, people abazothumeka, esitshela ukuthi, thuma to just be civil servants that participate in the building of a new South Africa. And people were excited. People said it's good to have a president who's a businessman because he's good for the economy. The West likes him, and all. He'll deal with corruption and all these amazing things that people said about him. But the truth is, and I'm not taking sides here, but I'm just stating from observations, the unemployment rate has really, really plummeted, and there's more joblessness than ever before, I think. Although there have been achievements, I think in his presidency, we can't ignore the everyday struggles that South Africans face. So do you think South Africa was caught up in a euphoric space of thinking that this new dawn would save us, or is there a chance for the new dawn to actually rise and make South Africa prosperous?
I think the new dawn, Cyril has a plan. Like, that's one thing I've never doubted. You can see it reflecting within the economy. He has a plan. But I think the problem comes within the certain individuals within the ruling party. As you know, there's been factions over the past few weeks. A highlight of them, the Ace Magashule
saga.
You see the Magashule camp, you see the Mabuza camp, you see the what's it called, the Cyril, the Ramaphosa camp, and maybe there's other camps that we don't know of. But highlighting those three, you actually see that if a system is working, right? If the president is serious about something and he wants to implement it, why now do you want to put a vote of no confidence against your own president that you guys elected? And also an SG that the branches also that elected. I don't know if you saw Nazareth 2017, when DD switched sides last minute, so he was going to vote for NDZ. So that was also like a politics game, as people would call it. But I think, when it comes to the ruling party and them implementing things that will better South Africans, it's all about self-interest, and I don't blame them, because we live in a free market, and everyone looks out for their own self-interest. So I don't blame them, really, but at the same time, what I do blame is stealing from the poor. That's something that I still can't wrap my head around. Like, I can't, because I always tell people that, guys, as much as people glorify corruption, and especially on Twitter, you need to understand that corruption isn't stealing from you and me. You know what I'm saying? Maybe it might steal from you and me if we come across potholes on the N3 or on the R101, whatever the case may be. But it's stealing from the poorest of the poorest, the people that actually need these things. That need these schools, that need these water pumps, that need these water reservoirs, that need all these infrastructure rollouts. But when it comes to the ANC being in government and doing good for the rest of the country, there have been some good leaders, but unfortunately have been from the party structures in order to make way for other individuals who seek self gain.
Yeah, I want to touch on two things that you mentioned there, but I'm going to start with the first, which is highly linked to self-interest and internal conflicts within the ANC. When I see, a party that is responsible for the running of the country, firstly, I think if you are a party in power, your internal states should be managed. And either you
Yeah.
can have your conflicts internally, but I think when the country sees this and the country starts joining factions, then it's bad for just the electorate in general. And so, I've been doing quite a bit of reading as well into the factions that came about as soon as Zuma was going to become president after Mbeki, and how that was not a really friendly transition of power, and that factionalism and conflicts can take people away, I think, from the main job, which is to change people's lives, to serve South Africans. So do you think that that pursuit of power and command and self-interest takes away from the actual focus of changing people's lives, of implementing good economic policies, not serving your own interest, but in the interest of the people?
I think it's solely dependent on the leader. As you mentioned, the power transition between Zuma and Mbeki and Zuma and Ramaphosa as well wasn't really friendly. Whether Zuma resigning from being president, or him wanting his ex-wife, I think his ex-wife, NDZ,
Nkosazana,
yeah. He was vouching for her, so hence why he wasn't very happy when Cyril got it. But I think, of course, yeah, they do. Imagine now, my family is coming across is coming against different families for my neighborhood, but but us ourselves are not united. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a family matter, but we're also fighting against each other as a family. It doesn't make sense. How are we going to look fighting against other families when they're united? You know what I'm saying? So I think with them looking out for the greater good of South Africa, I think it's a thing of like a by the way situation. It'd be like, yeah, we do the ANC thing, but by the way, the South Africans look after us, So
that's a good analogy.
I think it's more of a by the way issue. Like, wow, guys, with the ruling party, we've been in government. I think it gets to their heads because it's like 26 years in power. That's a very long time. That's a very, very long time to be in power. The same faces you see every day in the offices, you see the same people. I think they've sort of like forgotten, but I think Cyril is righting the wrongs now.
Speaking of righting the wrongs, do you think that the State Commission, Air Zondo, now might do damage to the ANC in the next election, or do you think they can rise from this?
I think they will rise. Remember, the ANC is like a phoenix. They rise in the ashes. Like, a lot of people will tell me that they will struggle in the next election. Yes, they might lose a couple of votes, but they will win. And I'll tell you why. I think majority of South Africans are politically illiterate, and I don't mean educational. Yes, you can have 50 degrees but not know what's cutting in the country. So I think they are politically illiterate. So if you look at ACE's case, when different branches from different provinces said we're going to Free State, they went to Free State. The interviewers asked them, so ma'am, why are you here? Sir, why are you here? They say, no, we're here. And they're like, well, what are you here for?
I remember watching that. I remember watching that.
Remember that? We're like, no, we're here for Cyril. And then they're like, dude, do you understand that you have the Makashule case? They're like, yeah, Kusala will be here, So I think a lot of people are very are not politically literate, and that is why the ANC keeps winning. And I remember I tweeted this a while ago, that do people vote? It was actually a poll. Do people vote for the ANC because they are haunted by apartheid and don't want it to be repeated? And a lot of people said yes. And it actually fascinated me that 26 years later, you think that with all the organizations established within the world, you think that segregation will come back, apartheid will come back. I personally don't think it will come back, but we'll have to wait and see till the election happens in 2 years' time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very tough, especially when. But the thing is also the argument of the people is also a thing of like, why should we listen to white-owned media? And I understand, I really do, because everything you read and see on TV is white-owned, you know. So just know that within media as well, it's also told from a different from someone's perspective. So that's what I've sort of like learned with media as well. You know, with media, when you watch the news and you read the newspaper, always take it with a pinch of salt.
But I look at the certain things and the way in which they address certain societal issues and their approach on affirmative action and BEE, and how they are really champions of destroying all of that because they don't think it serves the greater good of South Africa, and they have their points of view. But do you think that the DA is a party that commits political suicide on themselves in the way in which they approach situations, and especially with things that happened with Musi Maimane and Herman Mashaba? Do you think they stand a chance in ever running South Africa, though, given the way in which they portray themselves in the media and how sometimes their messages could be misunderstood and misconstrued?
I think the DA don't think that they're in South Africa, number one. Honestly speaking, like, I think all they see, like, I think they don't look at the bigger picture. They don't see that the majority of people that are poor in South Africa, when they talk about poor people, they're talking about black poor people. So when they look at South Africa, I don't know if they see the Western Cape or anything. Like, I understand there's different races that also have that are also poor, you know. But at the same time, I think when they look at different issues, they always see it from a neoliberal sort of point of view, you know, and they forget the injustices of the past. They don't understand that the people that they're trying to put equal against black people are people that are previously disadvantaged. Some people were not educated, as opposed to the white race. They were educated. So I think we also in South Africa, we suffer from this I call it a sickness, called identity politics. I think within everything that we try fix, identity politics has to play a role. Black, white, Indian, colored, whatever the case may be, we always look at the identity of the person. If we address the economy, white people all have all the money. If we look at politics, are you people in corruption? If we look at the private sector, they're stealing so much money in the private sector. Marcus Jooste stole like 102 billion rand, but they only got a slap on the wrist for 100 million, which is not fair, you know. But there's a lot of corruption happening everywhere, especially in the private sector, because the corruption it'll actually blow
it just doesn't get on the media platforms that are owned by companies in the private sector,
you know. So like, I think personally the DA and other political parties that have white people in it, it's all about the thing of like, they want everyone to be equal, but how do we equate people, but we are previously disadvantaged?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. I think we've had a robust conversation today, but I think to end off the conversation, what do you think the politicians and people who in the future need to learn from the past, take in from the present, and bring forward in the future?
I think what we need to learn from the past is that we can't have old leaders, number one. We can't have someone who's 60 and thinking about 20 years in the future if they don't even know that 20 years from now they're going to live, you know. I think we also need to have leaders that are not to be greedy, and I know this is going to be very, very controversial. Leaders that are going to be greedy, you know, because we live in a free market society. Everyone looks out for their own self-interest, but I think corruption must be eradicated, like, throughout, from the parties, actually, from the branches of the party throughout. It must be eradicated, and the people must be put first. I think the people of South Africa must be put first. like in other countries, first world countries as well, in order for us to want to be a first world country, because we're a third world country economically. But if you look at our infrastructure, we've got first world country, infrastructure. So I think when it comes to the leaders that are coming up next, they must really have good intentions. They must really know why they're there. And at the same time, they must know when to get out as well. You know. And there's also a quote, I don't know the guy, but I'll say his name is anonymous. He says politicians and diapers should be changed regularly and often for the same reason.
I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Mpendulo, for joining me. This was a very insightful conversation. It's good to hear young people's thoughts on politics. I know that it's a taboo issue or thing to talk about in young.
Pretty much, yeah.
I don't know why, because I mean, we're going to be in those positions in like 10, 20 years from now. But yeah, it's always good to engage. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Ta. I really appreciated the invite.